My name is Rebekah Drumsta. I am a survivor of 4 different religious cults. So when I say that I understand what religious trauma looks like, I really mean it, because I've lived it on so many different levels. And I say that I am a survivor of 4, or 4 different ones have impacted my life because, well, some of my first childhood memories are when I'm 5 years old, both of them. And I was on a church playground and just swinging, doing the slides. And all of a sudden, this little girl walks up to me and has handfuls of sand, and she just throws them into my eyes, blinding me, scaring me to death. And she starts yelling at me. It's another child on the playground, so she's got to be around my age. And she says that my family is going to hell and that no one can ever talk to us again because we're leaving that church and we're changing denominations. And again, at around 5 years old, I remember my father's good friend was murdered. And the reason he was murdered is because he had removed his family from a Mormon sect down in Mexico and actually become members of our church, the one that we eventually left. But they wanted the children back, and he refused to send his children back to Mexico to be part of this Mormon sect. And as an atonement, his blood had to be shed. So those are my 2 earliest memories of religion, and even some of my earliest from my entire childhood. And that really kind of sets the tone for the rest of it here. And if you don't agree with us, you're rejected. Or if you don't agree with us, you're killed. So that's kind of those first memories there. But today, kind of what I do, I'm a wife, I'm a mom. I do a bunch of things within the religious trauma, like consulting and advocating for survivors. I'm also the interim CEO of an international nonprofit with DNA identity trauma. You take an at-home DNA test and find out all these surprises. I'm also a board member with the Attachment and Trauma Network, as well as the VASHG initiative, which is supporting individuals of spiritual abuse and religious trauma. But we talk about religious trauma, and sometimes it's hard to define. There's a bunch of different definitions that are floating out there. And so for the next, a few slides, I am going to throw some definitions at you. So that might get a little boring, but I really want you to understand what I believe things are. And, it's kind of how my working definitions, and understand that. So the Global Center for Religious Research defines religious trauma as religious trauma results from an event, series of events, relationships, or circumstances within or connected to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And I was honored to be one of the co-authors on GCRR's paper and their study on religious trauma, where we surveyed over 1,500 individuals and discovered that 10 to 15% of adults in the U.S. currently suffer from religious trauma, and 27 to 33% of adults in the U.S. at some point in their life have experienced religious trauma. And so a 10 to 15% right now. So if right now you're processing religious trauma, you are absolutely not alone. There are a lot of us who are processing this, who are working through the religious trauma right now today. So just know that right off the bat, you are not alone. I personally believe that spiritual abuse is the root of harm in high demand, coercive, or controlling religious communities. And one of those definitions, what is spiritual abuse? That's using one's power or authority to control, guilt, manipulate, or coerce another with claims of biblical or spiritual truth. This includes psychological or emotional manipulation and coercion through the use of spirituality, which undermines or completely removes a person's autonomous spiritual empowerment and focuses on external spiritual performance. In other words, My husband always doesn't like definitions because they're like, blah, blah, blah. But so in other words, spiritual abuse is an attempt to control an individual's spirituality, subsequent beliefs and choices, and way of living with that person or group's correct thinking. And there's always an inequality of power dynamics. The spiritual abuse can come from inside a home. It can come from inside a religious system, inside a church, inside anywhere where there's a yoga group, anywhere where there are a spiritual leadership, and that power dynamic is different. So that's what feeds this spiritual abuse. In these type of environments, you will see that good versus evil, holy versus sinful, us versus the world, right versus wrong. And that's just the us versus them mentality. And again, power and control. Whenever there's abuse, whatever form, whether we're talking financial abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, there is someone struggling to have the power or maintain control. There's always that power and control dynamic. So part of my childhood included Bill Gothard's organization called IBLP. And you may be familiar with IBLP because of the recent documentary called Shiny Happy People. And Bill Gothard never tried to disguise this concept of authority. He developed the umbrella of authority, which has seeped into evangelical culture. And the umbrella of authority gave all this power. And it was literally the cornerstone of everything us kids raised inside of there. It was the cornerstone for everything. And Steve Hassan, he is one of the leading cult experts in the United States. He developed something called the BITE model of authoritarian control, BITE. And so you might be saying, wasn't raised in a Christian cult. I don't have that, but perhaps there was some authoritarian control in your system. So does that mean that perhaps your behavior was highly controlled? The things you could and could not do, the places you could and could not go, information, only these sources. There were banned books in your home or in your church. There were things that you could not watch. There were things that, only these sources for news, only these Christian authors, these certain ones you can read. Your thoughts were controlled. Inside the Bill Gothard world, as children, we were taught to take our thought captive, lock it up, and throw it away. Because we had to control any thought that came into us. There were strongholds that the devil could set up inside our lives, and by controlling all of our thoughts. So we had to literally, anytime, oh no, I'm mad at mom. Oh, that's a sin. Take a thought, lock it up, throw it away. We had to control our thoughts and our emotions. The feeling of anger in my world was a sin. Not, I hit my brother because I was mad. I felt anger. So that was wrong. So again, while there may not be the specific cult things in a lot of religious environments, there very often is this authoritarian control that is quite obvious. All right. Why do people accept unhealthy beliefs? What gets people into these situations in the first place? Well, you're often searching for something that's different, something to change, something to help you. Your unhealed trauma, the past or the present pain and hurt, it attracts you to a group, a belief, or an idea that seems to have the answer. Or if you were like me, you were just born inside of it. You were raised inside this structure that accepted that set of beliefs, and that's all you've ever known. It was your normal. So individuals that have unresolved, unhealed trauma or unhealed abuse in their past, it's just so human nature. We just we gravitate towards what feels normal. It's part of being human. We just go to what we're used to. And so if you've never experienced agency or safety, or you've never felt empowered, your response is to accept the exact same control dynamic which originally harmed you. So if you take a traumatized person and mix it with this new religious belief or idea about life, whatever it might be, what's going to happen? Are we going to have a reasonable belief or outcome? Or is something going to be a little twisted? Are you actually joining a spiritual community or a cult? So one example from my life is I grew up in the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. There's a documentary being released quite soon that shares about all the abuse from the entire denomination. And I thought when I moved from that specific denomination into another denomination that allowed me to wear pants, because I had only been skirts only my whole life, suddenly now I was free. I had so much freedom to wear pants. But because I didn't recognize all of the hurt and the toxic theologies and all these things in my life, I felt free, but I was back in exactly the control dynamics of that church structure were exactly the same. I just felt that I'd been free. The last definition, I promise. What is healing? That's a word you see everywhere. My journey to healing, and this to healing, and that to healing. But what is it? I define healing as recognizing patterns, triggers, and reactions in myself, understanding why they're happening, and how I can best help myself through them without causing further harm to myself or to people around me. Why is healing so important? Why does everybody talk about healing? Because if we don't heal, we will repeat the same patterns, just in different ways. The unhealed trauma patterns will be seen in our lives, our beliefs, our families, our communities. So like I said, I was raised in this toxic, cultish, religious world. But I was the family. I was the kids caught in that ripple effect. Someone else had joined the organization because of their unhealed trauma pattern. And I was like the collateral damage. So if we don't stop long enough, and that is one of my greatest encouragements right now to people who do still identify as Christian in the United States. We have the deconstruction movement. We have all of these things that are going on. But you have to stop long enough to heal. Or we're going to take the very patterns that we are rejecting, the very dynamics that we see as abusive, if we don't stop and heal our own hearts, we're going to take elements of that into the new systems, into our families, into our communities, and the ripple effect is going to happen all over again. All right. Into the cutesy part, the Band-Aid stitches and scars. When we realize religious trauma, we realize I may have been abused spiritually. I was in an unhealthy home. I was in an unhealthy church or, religious program. The first things we want to do is, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Well, we like to do the easy way out so often. So we grab a Band-Aid. That looks good enough. I don't need to go to the doctor. Well, we've been wired with something called spiritual bypassing. Just pray about it. Give it to God. Read your Bible more. Go to church more. So our first instinct might be those Band-Aids of, I'm just going to pray about it. God's got it. Because that's what we've been told. You also might be tempted to do one of two things. When you realize, something's off, something was wrong. How do I fix this? What do I do? You might be tempted to become even more spiritual. But becoming more spiritual by, maybe I'll go to seminary, or maybe I'll read more books and go to church and take more conferences and do all these religious things. The problem with that is that can lead to something called religiosity. Because if we're coming from an unhealed place, a place of trauma and hurt and wounds, we can go into this place of religiosity where it becomes, we have to do all these things and do all these things. Or we run away. It's again, the human nature. It's that pendulum swing. You go from one extreme to the other extreme. So we may completely abandon everything about our faith. Well, if that hurt me, boom, I'm done. which if that is your choice to make, but I challenge you to make sure it is done from a place of healing. If you do choose to become more spiritual, or you do choose to walk away from the faith that you grew up in, I ask that you just please stop long enough to heal, to make sure that that is a decision that you really want to make, and it's not just a reaction to the hurt and the harm that you're feeling. And then the third bandit is do more, do more, do more. Sometimes people might jump into alcohol or drug addiction. We might start volunteering. We might overcommit ourselves, which I may have done this fall. We might overcommit ourselves to all these things. We stay busy, busy, busy. One, because we were taught to stay busy in the church, constantly working, constantly volunteering, constantly doing more, but also because it kind of fills that void of, I don't want to stop long enough to fix this. I don't know what I'm feeling. So those are some of those Band-Aids that we think we can just slap on when we recognize that there's hurt there. But then as we go, we realize that Band-Aid's not enough. We really have to go down deep and see, okay, how deep is this cut? How deep are these wounds? And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of bravery for us to stop and analyze. This might be the deconstruction time, when we begin to piece apart and analyze, okay, all of this stuff. So you see what happened to you. We see the real problems. Okay, this is what happened. And that's one little stitch. We understand who harmed us. Okay, this is what happened. Okay, well, my family believed this, or the pastor believed that, or this community did this, or this person assaulted me, or this person controlled me. We begin to name it for what it is. We begin to see what we believed. So every time one of those little moments happens, that's one more stitch. That's one more stitch that we're beginning to treat our religious trauma the way it should be. We understand what that real problem is. And then there's the scars. Again, women's conference. Well, not women's conference. Women conference led by women here. So we understand. I'm going to talk about my C-section scar. It's still there. And sometimes it still hurts, because there were nerve endings there when they had to slice me open so that my baby could live. And that's what happens with religious trauma. We have started healing. Okay, we decided a Band-Aid's not enough. We got to start digging in a little deeper, one stitch at a time. But now that we see, okay, and I keep looking at my arm here, I'm imagining a slice on my arm, and we start recognizing that it's beginning to heal. But just like my C-section scar, there's reminders that are still behind. It's still there. And so you may have damaged relationships. I know a lot of us, we have friends from our childhood. We might have grown up together 20 years in the same church, and they won't talk to you anymore. You may have family members that say, if you're going to believe that, I am never talking to you again. You've turned your back on Christ. You maybe get labeled, heretic. Well, I'll just quote Pink at you at that point and just be like, well, I'll be your heretic. But we have damaged relationships. Marriages often don't survive religious trauma. Then it gets handed down to our kids. We're raising children while we're healing from this. And so damaged relationships are one of those tender spots that are always there, even though we've already started healing. And there's something called spiritual identity disruption. It's a model that I created because I didn't feel like deconstruction was a word that fully captured the experience that I had had. And then I was watching my friends and, my clients and other people around me were experiencing. So spiritual identity disruption is the entire picture. Because deconstruction is, what do I believe? Is it toxic or is it healthy? Why do I believe it? It's the dissecting of the belief. But spiritual identity disruption, you suddenly say, this affects my political views. This affects my parenting. This affects my marriage. This affects, I thought it was gospel truth to have a meat, 2 vegetables, and a bread on the dinner table every meal. It affects how I cook. And so that was the identity disruption. And there's more about it on my website if you're interested. But it was this process that we go through of understanding it's not just my religious beliefs. It's my entire life. And then one of the scars also is, what do I believe? Okay, so I recognize all this stuff is harmful, but then we're left going, but now what? What do I do next? So sometimes, even though we feel like, okay, we're good, I'm telling you, it's another layer. And that's part of the identity disruption. Okay, I'm good. And then boom, something happens and it's another layer. Okay, what do I still believe that? I don't know. Do I? Those type of questions surface. Religious trauma healing. Let's look at it a little bit more. But what healing does not mean is that there's no boundaries. When we've been raised in those controlling religious environments, often boundaries are something we were never allowed. We never understood. And so we have to start with our own personal boundaries with ourselves. And then that does continue to expand out. And healing doesn't mean that you can't place a boundary to people who are still in your life or from your past. It's very important, actually, that we do. It does not mean that people just get away with it. Even though you are healing from religious trauma, it doesn't mean that everybody just gets a free pass. You can still speak your truth, tell your story. It doesn't mean that evil gets to win. It also, unfortunately, doesn't mean that you will never be hurt again. But what healing does mean is that you learn to become responsive instead of reactive. You begin to feel safe, maybe in your own body for the first time, around with your new friends, in the world. We were taught the world was such an evil place. Remember, it's like us versus the world. You know, we were taught it was evil. And then you start realizing this is a pretty cool place sometimes. You start to feel safe in the world. You can accept people's freedom to believe differently. This was really huge for me. Because when I first started coming out of fundamentalist faith and the cult control dynamics, I was angry because how dare they believe this stuff? How dare they have taught me all of this? And then one day I realized if I honestly believe in freedom of thought and freedom of choice, then everyone from my past has the freedom to believe that stuff. I also now have the freedom to say how it harmed me. But they're completely free. And so when you recognize that people have the freedom to believe differently from you, it takes that weight off your shoulders. Healing from religious trauma also means you start to let go of perfection. How many of us had to perform on stage for worship teams, for all of this stuff? We had this level of perfection that we had to keep constantly, this image. You are the image bearer of Christ. For me, I was the image of the homeschool world, the homeschool movement that had started. So I had to look good every time I left the house. There's an increased self-awareness. When you begin noticing that, that's a really good sign that that healing is in play. Remember how I defined healing? That included that self-awareness of recognizing patterns, triggers, how to help yourself through it, how not to harm others or yourself. And you begin to welcome rest because you know how to ask for help. You recognize, I need to rest. You might ask your husband for a weekend off, or can you watch the kids? So, because I need to go to the park and just sit and stare at the ducks on the pond. You recognize, or you say, I've got to go to therapy. I need to go talk to somebody about this. And instead of that constant productivity and that constant perfection, you recognize it. And you also see that rest is part of healing. So some tools for us as we're trying to heal from our religious trauma. Find a community. 15 years ago, when I began deconstructing, there was nothing available. I felt so alone. And I would Google, I'm questioning my faith. And it was the spiritual bypassing stuff. Just pray about it. Just talk to God. Go talk to your pastor. There was no help. So find a community. That might mean there's a couple folks that you grew up with who are in the same place and you meet over Zoom or meet over coffee once a month. You join a Facebook group, something that provides that community. I didn't have it. And now, all these years later, I have this tribe of people around me, and I am seeing this is what was missing in my own process. It's that rest thing again now. Allow yourself time to rest. So often we kept going and going and going and going and going, the church schedules and the performance and the do. Allow yourself time to rest. And don't rush to accept the next right belief. I had a client one time who called in like a frenzy because they were like, all this stuff is in the news and I don't know what I believe about it. And I have to make sure that I know what I believe about it. And I was like, why? Well, what do I believe about LGBTQ? And what do I believe about racism? What do I believe about the patriarchy? And what do I believe about, and just going down. I mean, we're like talking 15 different things. I don't know. I think I know, but I don't know. Because we've been told we have to have an answer. Be ready at any moment to give an answer to any man who asks you the reason of the faith and the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. We've been taught, have the answer right now. But you don't have to. You don't have to rush to accept that new right thing. Connect with a coach or a therapist. Find somebody. The hand up, the hand down concept. You can help someone with your bravery and your courage right now by going and seeking help, seeking professional help. You may need to learn some critical thinking skills, how to make decisions. And I recently had a friend who, I say I hate it now when I have friends who know me well enough to call me out on stuff. And he just looked at me and said, Rebekah, all you have to do is practice it. You have everything you need. Go practice it. And you're going to screw it up. You're going to make mistakes. But that's part of practice. So sometimes when we have to learn these skills and how to make decisions or how to think, not just be told what to think, how to analyze information for ourselves and find it for ourselves, you will make mistakes, but you have to practice. When you feel that sense of overwhelm, like my client did, it's time to stop. It's time to rest. And be aware of that pendulum swing. More religious, walk away from religion. We're tempted to go to the opposite. Watch out for that. And again, using those critical thinking skills, I completely support your decision to go where you need to go, but if it is from a place of healing and intention, not reactionary. Write down your values. When you do go, what is it I believe? I think I don't believe anything right now. I'm scared. I don't know. Write them down. And whenever you question that again, you can go back to the list. You can subtract, you can add, but you have more morals, values, ethics, beliefs still core to you than you realize. And again, you're not alone. 10 to 15% of Americans right now are struggling through religious trauma. Before I close, I want to make sure that you know that this mindset that we were given is going to set you up for failure. We were told, be like Jesus. You grew up in church, most likely. I want to be more Christ-like. I want to be like Christ. I want to be like Jesus. Well, you're going to fail because you're not Jesus. You're not divine. Humans cannot achieve that. And if you still identify as Christian, you can look to Jesus as an example. It'd be like, okay, how did Jesus handle stuff? What did, the WWJD stuff? Sure, what did he do? But do not hold yourself to that level of expectation because every time you're going to fail. We were taught be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And the whole concept of keep working, keep doing, idle hands at the devil's workshop. We were taught this stuff and we kept going. That's a toxic environment. Number one, trying to get you to achieve something that's never going to happen. And then never stop trying to achieve something that's never going to happen. So process that, analyze that. Why am I working so hard? You don't have to. All right. Were you in a religious high demand group? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you're going, all right, Rebekah, you had the cult background, but I was just a normal little church, a little Baptist church on the corner. Like, how do I know if it was, not just a little church that made some mistakes along the way and some of what they believed caused harm? How do I know if it was really a high demand group or not? Well, let's look at a couple things. Was there a primary leader whose teachings, opinions, and direction was followed without question? And if people did question that leader or the structure that was in place, what happened? How did the community refer to people who'd left? Does everybody look or talk the same? In my church, all the women wore skirts, knee length or longer. And our youth pastor had culottes, the big puffy culottes, so that if a teenager walked in to come to youth group, they would have the girl put those on if she was wearing pants or shorts. We all had to look the same. Are there detailed rules or beliefs that you're just expected to follow or learn? And a lot of them aren't even spoken. They're just understood. What sort of financial donation, payment, and volunteer time is expected or encouraged that shows your devotion to Christ or the community? What recruitment tactics are used to bring new people in? Where's that us versus them language? Us versus the world. We have the truth. They don't. And what have you been asked to sign? Are there any documents, agreements? All these things. Are you asked to sign over property? Are you asked to sign? Is it legally binding? Watch out for those things. And finally, my own religious beliefs now. You're processing them. You're not sure, maybe where to go. Let's ask this. And if you're not religious anymore, it can still apply to your view of the world, to politics, to many other areas. But ask yourself, pick a belief. You can do that right now, whether it's a religious belief, a political belief, a belief about parenting, a belief about whatever it is, about women, about men. And ask yourself, who does that belief silence? Who does it harm, oppress, liberate, center, or give power to? And then the beautiful question that we should all learn from children: why? Why does that belief harm that person? Why does it silence them? Why does it give them the power? And then, where did I learn this belief? Was it a pastor? Was it grandma? Was it a guy in college? Or was it just my own lived experience that led me to this conclusion? And so where did I learn it? Where did that person learn it? Where did that person learn it? Keep tracking back your beliefs. Where do they even come from? What is the root? What's the source? And then why is this belief so important to me? And what would happen if I changed or let go of this belief? Would it change my family? Would it change myself? Would I feel like I'm making God angry? Would I feel like I'm going to go to hell? What would happen if you changed or let go of that and go back to the beautiful question of children? Why? And this final slide, if you're in the Band-Aid stage, or you're recognizing in one stitch at a time stage, or you hit there's still scars there and it still really hurts. You're not alone. It may hurt for a while. It may hurt for a long time. This stuff may still remind us of that. But you're not alone, and you're gonna make it. Thank you, guys.